Welcome everyone to the April You Already Own It Cloud Office Hours. I'm Ken Nuebler, your host and one of the senior cloud strategists here at Planet Technologies. And today we have a discussion on creating a secure foundation, building your security baseline governance plan. In addition to our guest speakers joining me today, we have the whole cloud strategist team below, as well as our You Already Own It program team, who consists of Casey Clayton, who's our program lead, Mary Tucker, Michelle McGraw, and Samantha Winter, who work with us on scheduling briefings, sending out our monthly newsletter, and making sure questions that are submitted to the program are turned around within a 24-hour period. And lastly, our You Already Own It sponsor is Steve Winter, who's our Executive Vice President of Business Development and Delivery. If you have a question today, please put them in the chat, raise your hand, or you can always email us at youalreadyownit@go-planet.com. Also, show some reactions. Use your emoticons if you hear something you like, or contact your account team directly. Lastly, we record all these sessions, so feel free to share it with your colleagues. With that said, just a quick warning that we're now going to start the recording. Welcome. Today we will discuss creating a secure foundation, building your security baseline governance plan. For more information about today's program, make sure you check out our blog on this topic. We have also included useful links at the end of this discussion, so check it out at the end of the presentation. So with me today are Scott Dowling, my colleague and senior cloud strategist with Planet, Dr. Michael Lanham, Director of Security and Compliance, and Karsten Du, our Managing Architect for the cloud. Welcome, everyone. We're so glad that you're joining us on the program today. Before we get started, I would love to do some quick anonymous polls. We're not going to wait around for them, so go ahead and launch them, Casey, when you get a chance. First off, we're just, we want to know what kind of organization you work for. So if you could just quickly answer if you're state, federal, education, commercial, tribal, or nonprofit. We're just kind of curious who's with us today. Next, do you have a documented plan for governance in place? And this is the key thing here. Is it documented? Do you have a fully developed plan, a partially developed plan? It's a known shortfall that you know you need to do it, but you haven't gotten to it yet. Do you need one? And no, I love litigation. That was kind of something we threw in there at the last minute there. So please fill out the anonymous poll. We'd love to hear from you. So Mike, if you could start us off, kind of talk to us a little bit about what governance is. Dr. Mike, it's all you.
Roger that. Thanks very much. So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Mike Lanham here. And so what I really want to just emphasize is I'll let you read what is on the screen, but here's a way of converting all of that into a bumper sticker. Bumper stickers are necessarily short. They're supposed to be concise. They might even be pithy. Write what you do and do what you write. And I'm not sure why that slide just jumped forward, but anyway, so write what you do. Write out in some form, some fashion, who does what, why, when, where, how, and then do what it is that you write. When you do what you write, you are able to absolutely provide evidence back to some external auditor, some person that matters to you, that you are doing the security processes that you have declared that you're going to be doing. And that is certainly going to be one of the things that you're challenged to do in an environment where you have any kind of formal compliance requirements. When you don't have formal compliance requirements, you almost always have some other form of protected and or valuable data that you want to secure. You want to keep it confidential. You want to maintain its integrity. And so write what you do and do what you write. And on that note, I think we'll go ahead and move to the next slide.
All right, thanks, Dr. Mike. So this is all about documenting the policies, the risks, the decisions, and the services, and how they will work together to be secure for your customers and how they consume those services. And that's what today's session is all about, and we're going to discuss. If you were with us back in February, we went over the 5 disciplines of cloud governance. Today's session is a much deeper dive on just one of those, which is the security baseline governance and how to get started. So Scott, can you give us a quick overview? Just, we won't waste much time on this, but a quick overview of the 5 disciplines of cloud governance, and we'll go from there.
Absolutely. If everybody recalls, I kind of kicked off this governance topic here at Planet for our You Already Own It program for 2 main reasons. One, a little bit from a selfish perspective in terms that A lot of the security calls that I'm on, or I'm sorry, a lot of the governance calls that I'm on always turn into security calls. So I'd like to get a little bit more focus and a little bit more of a spotlight on governance and what it really means. And second, once everybody has moved their workloads to the cloud, right, it's really thinking about where help is going to be needed most. And we all know security is certainly top of mind, but governance is just as important. And in looking through the Microsoft governance theories that they have out there, I found their 5 disciplines that they have on their Microsoft Learn website that I found extremely enlightening. We covered those 5 from a high level in February, and we hope to go through each one of these as we are today with the security baseline. Although, and I did promise Ken, I would admonish everybody, because Ken allowed everybody to vote which topic we would cover first, and trying to get away from security discussions. Of course, everybody voted on the security discussion as part of the governance. So we're going to cover it today, but I want to promise you all that we're going to hit these other 4 that are equally important for you and your organization. And those are cost management, which pretty much everybody understands, identity baseline, which I think is, typically top of mind with everybody, and it talks about a lot of the access controls and things of that nature that Microsoft offers within their cloud stack. But 2 that maybe a lot of people don't think about: resource consistency, really big on the Azure end, of course, but really applies across the board in terms of your policies and keeping anything that you create or deploy in a consistent manner so that you can more easily manage and monitor that. And then deployment acceleration as well, which is really centralization, standardization, and consistency in the way and the approach that you take to deployment and configuration. So we're going to cover all of these as well. I think they're all extremely important and all part of one giant story. Thanks, Ken.
Thanks, Scott. And keep in mind, this is not IST's job to figure all this out. I mean, certainly they're a big part of this. This is going to take a team approach. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today. So now let's get into today's topic: security baseline governance, which Scott mentioned was what our customers voted on here and more about first. So we'll get to the other ones later on in the year. Let's get started. So security baseline discipline ensures technical requirements and security constraints are consistently applied to cloud environments as those requirements mature. And you do this by developing a documented governance plan and then operationalizing it. To put it simply, the security baseline discipline covers the organizational policies and processes that you can put in place to protect your cloud deployment against security risks. So how do you get started? Well, first, you got to develop the security baseline governance. And luckily enough, Microsoft gave us a nice template to use. This will help you with your consistent documentation and communications. When I was a service owner at the state of North Carolina, I was the service owner for Office 365 and Azure. I didn't realize it at the time, but we were actually creating governance. We had a process that asked us 80 questions that we'd have to fill out before we could release any new service offering into production. And I remember going around to the various departments like security, risk office, change management, network operations, identity, etc., to get their sign off that we had a plan and policies in place to operationalize the consistency of their part of the service. This is an example of exactly how we consistently assessed and documented the maturity of our service and how we would apply the policy, security, and communications to the services we released into production. So these 80 questions covered things like security, compliance, operations, communications, risks, continuity. And so it was a checklist. And as you start your governance planning process, keep these things in mind. Talk to your users. Identify your biggest users and make sure that you can understand their core business. Balance the risks and benefits. Review their business, regulatory, compliance, and legal needs, and make sure you're optimizing your governance plan for all those outcomes. Align to your business priorities. Business goals will help you define how much time and energy you need to invest in governance. And then embed these governance decisions directly into the solutions you create. This is all about operationalizing. So many governance decisions can be implemented by turning on and off features in Azure or Office 365, for example. Or only letting people see what they have access to because we're controlling those items in the services, right? Use a phased approach. Think about change management. Start small, get some feedback, look at your metrics with tickets and things like that, and then update the settings and processes before proceeding to a larger group to make sure that your operation teams are ready to go. Reinforce with training and champions programs to adopt learning, especially for your admins as they're moving forward with these governance policies and procedures. Have a strategy for communications and for governance, right? So, in the state, we had business relationship managers. I think some agencies have agency relationship managers, but same thing. That is the glue that holds central IT with your business units, right? So use those resources if you have somebody that handles that service level part between your business and the customer. And then make sure you define your roles and responsibilities. Everybody needs to understand their part in this governance plan because they're going to be crucial to making sure that it's enforced and making sure that it's being done consistently. So those are just some ideas, I just want to throw out there from things that I've worked on in the past. And then after all of this, after you've got it all documented and you understand how it's all going to be working, then you can operationalize your governance plan. And then for Azure, Microsoft's Cloud Adoption Framework is a great way to operationalize your policies and decisions consistently. So let's first start talking about documenting and communicating security governance. Microsoft provides a really nice template. We talked about it, the security baseline governance. And in that document, that template, actually, there's a couple different highlights that I want to hit on here, specifically business risks. This talks about how you're going to handle data breaches and service disruptions. Things like indicators and metrics. So things like how you're going to keep track of certain things like metrics on the number of sensitive data stores that you have. Maybe attack surfaces, how many total data sources you have, and applications will be cloud hosted, what percentage of those data services are classified as sensitive. Understanding these things are crucial to your governance plan and your design. Overall standards compliance, ratio of compliance adherence to security standards is huge. Patch latency, I'm just giving some examples of some of the indicators and metrics of, understanding how long it's been since VMs have had OS and software patches applied. So those are just some examples. Getting down to policy adherence is about deployment planning, testing, annual planning, quarterly planning, education training, and auditing. These all show consistency as it relates to policy adherence. Maturity, again, governance is a non-stop thing, right? It's always going to be changing. It's always going to be changing as it moves forward. As new services get rolled out, you're going to have to make sure you build it into your plan. So making sure you have a process, an approach to planning, building, adopting, and operating those new services as they come into your environment. And the key here is that you have a consistent approach on how you roll them out, right? And then lastly, tool chain, which is all about operationalizing your services and what tools you have access to. Specifically in Azure, we're going to talk about that in the next couple slides here. What tools do you have in Azure to actually enforce these decisions now that you've made them and document them? So that's kind of cool. Here's the actual table of contents. I wanted to show you what the baseline template looked like. This is straight from the security baseline governance template that we have that Microsoft's given us. So the first step is implementing the change, is communicating what's desired, right? So these policies and guidance in this document have been developed in conjunction with the governance best practices documented in the Cloud Adoption Framework, which Mike and Karsten will now talk more about next when we discuss how to operationalize your governance policies and decisions. So Mike, if you could start this off, I think Karsten's going to work with you on some examples as we go down these domains, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would actually draw everybody's attention back over to the survey. Of those who replied, one individual replied that their documented governance process is fully developed, and that about 40% of people said, partially developed. And maybe we had at least one snarky answer that says, no, I love lawyers. The point of it, the point of all of that being, though, that even when it is fully developed, this is supposed to be a continuous process.
Yeah.
And so, security, risk management, however you want to phrase it, it is not a do it once and then forget about it, or do it once every 3 years and forget about it, and then just come back to it, 4 months before your external assessment and have what I've heard some people call a SPASX, where they go through a major exercise, everybody drops what they're doing, and spend 90 days preparing for an evaluation. Let's not do that. So, but going back to the operational governance, actually, I do want to pick on Karsten, as a matter of fact, because Karsten's one of the principal people to help put together Azure Virtual Networking in Planet. And then I'm going to talk a little bit more, a little bit later on about some like incident response. But Karsten, would you be willing to talk to us about network security and setting up a virtual or a security benchmark inside of network security as the domain?
Yeah. But first, I want to call out the what's mentioned here is the Azure Security Benchmark. It's a policy framework that we can utilize over our environment, of course, as we have built it in Azure. And just to take another step back to one of the comments that came initially here, you may not have a compliance requirement for your business or organization. Azure Security Benchmark is providing you with a compliance requirement like policy framework that you can use to measure the state of your infrastructure. So as Mike is asking about network security, if I use Azure Security Benchmark and I build an Azure infrastructure, I put in place maybe a couple of networks defined in a virtual network, and I create a couple of subnets. If I leave it with that, and now I place servers inside of these various subnets that I build, Azure Security Benchmark is going to highlight to me that I have no control over the traffic in the subnets that I built. There can be different ways of using controls. I can use again network security groups, for example, that will satisfy some of the controls in the Azure Security Benchmark, where a firewall can be another control or control technology where we can configure certain values, configure restrictions in what's allowed in the traffic flow. And again, we can use the Azure Security Benchmark to see the impact of the changes. So this also goes back to what Mike said about governance and keeping your security risk threat, what have you. A check is that the result of the Azure Security Benchmark policy, it's being evaluated on a 12-hour cadence. So that means that you have a near real-time view on what your network security look like. Just to relate to one of the control domains, like Mike asked me about.
So thank you, Karsten. And remember, if you've got any questions or comments, go ahead and put them in the chat window, or go ahead and otherwise convey that you've got some reaction. So if you want to give Karsten a thumbs up, that'd be great. But the other topic, the other domain that I wanted to particularly emphasize was incident response. And I don't want to emphasize it in the form of technology per se, but the people and the processes that sit above the technology. And so there are a lot of people that would argue that security and compliance as a combined type of activity is about people, processes, and technology, with technology being much less than 1/3 of that equation. I would even posit to you that people are at least half of that equation, if you want to call it an equation. So in the incident response and outside of the technology benchmark, I want to find out, are you, as listeners to this webcast, talking to each other in a form of a tabletop exercise? A tabletop exercise is just one way of getting stakeholders in an organization to sit around a table and to have a scenario posited that triggers a portion of their incident response plan. Now, some organizations, and especially a lot of technical administrators, are frequently say, I don't need to practice system outages or system disruptions. I get them every week. I deal with this every day.
Yeah.
But that's not what I'm talking about when I talk about incident response plans. What I really want people to get after is having some playbooks inside their incident response plan for major substantive disruptive activities. So one example might be, if you've got a collection of employee data, your HR data, what happens if you have a major PII breach? If you are, that is something that can be very emotional You could also end up losing, if you're, say, as an example, a healthcare related company, a covered entity, or a business associate. You have a patient data breach. How do you deal with that? And you bring in the people of the company that are not necessarily the IT specialist. You bring in a lawyer. You bring in your public affairs specialist. You bring in the person who's going to be stuck in front of the camera if you don't have a public affairs specialist, because it will become local news. You bring in not just your IT team, but you also bring in your CEO and other critical members of the organization to talk about what those incidents are. And when you finish doing that kind of activity and you collect your lessons learned from that and fold those lessons learned into the next tabletop, consider reusing the strategy for a slightly, or correction, the scenario for a slightly different audience. So take that same PII breach and let's have that discussion with the technologists of the organization. How does that impact the various elements of your help desk, your system administration team, maybe your Azure AD team, your Exchange Online team, assuming that you have a team? It might be the one person who does all of that, in which case maybe you fold them into the tabletop exercise. Prior to March of 2020, the very notion that a lot of companies could move to a remote-only capability inside of a month of being told to do so, that would have been an extreme incident and an extreme kind of situation that the company might never have thought about trying to do. How do you take 90+% of your population and not have them come to work and still do the missions that the company needs to get done? So that's where the piece that I would talk about in terms of, or that I'm trying to advocate and strengthen here, is your incident response is more than just an overall policy that says we're prepared. It's a collection of plays that have been thought about ahead of time. And so as you start adapting to the actual situation, the adaptations will have been rehearsed at least once or twice. And I think that's all I really want to go ahead and specifically call out, unless somebody wants to talk or wants to put in the chat channel that a particular domain they wanted to have a discussion, for which they wanted a discussion. So I'm not seeing anything in the chat yet. So Ken, why don't we go ahead and move on to our next slide?
Sure.
And I think we're going to hand this back over to Karsten, because this is an example of one of those baselines for networking.
Absolutely. I do want to call out, so we talked a little bit about some of the control domains and ways to actually manage the control domains in Azure using Defender for Cloud and Azure Security Baseline, ASB. You can get started with this for free. I just want to call that out. Using ASB has no cost with it, and it's as you can imagine, very, very powerful. Once you build something in Azure and you have this other tool at your fingertips, it becomes very visible what your security and the risk posture looks like in Azure. So this table on this slide, it shows some of the actual tools or places you will go to do certain things, and the tool itself or the activity itself is listed on the left-hand side here. I'm just going to pick one of them. For example, monitor security health of networks and resources. Here you see both Defender for Cloud and Azure Monitor is involved with that, or can be involved with that. Defender for Cloud will, if you aren't looking at the health, complain about that, and you will fail your check for that. It will also look at how you configure your health monitoring. So it's a very, very, very helpful view that I want to say all of our customers, once they realize the strength of looking at your posture in this way, it's so informative. I can't. It's my soapbox tool in Azure. Azure Monitor is also very important, especially in light of how the world is changing when it comes to threats. But it's not just about a malware that got downloaded that is doing something. It's also a matter of how it's doing it and when it's doing it. Azure Monitor is certainly a tool that goes into a security baseline to look for activity and look for abnormalities, maybe more so. If there are not any questions to this page here, I think we are going to move on, Ken.
Yeah, so Carsten, just tying this into the security baseline template, right? This would be the tool chain section that you'd start talking about as far as how you enforce and operationalize some of the policies that you made, right?
Yes. It's a little bit more complex than just using the Azure security baseline policy. But absolutely, these are some of the tools that we can use to create a security baseline. And if you think about what you're seeing here, there's another entry here about in the middle of the page. It says enforce geo-regional restrictions. That is a decision you make as an organization. That is not a decision a tool will make for you. And as you see here, Azure policy is a way you can control and govern your decisions around having geo-regional restrictions. I hope that makes sense, Ken.
Yep. And then in addition to this, obviously, you can certainly use compliance management for some of these capabilities to help you monitor moving forward your policies and things like that, right?
Yes, and the compliance manager is, of course, our little co-pilot in Office 365, right? It's more geared towards Office 365 and the tools and the services found within Office 365. Yep. What we're looking at here, the security baseline for in Azure is for Azure infrastructure, SaaS and PaaS.
Good point. Yep, exactly. All right, let's move on. Still talking about operationalizing governance. Carsten, can you talk a little bit about the cloud adoption framework?
Yeah, so our friends over at Microsoft, they are very good at giving us starter kits. So in line with or in parallel with the templates that Ken talked about earlier to get your written governance in place, your documentation around governance in place. There's another excellent starting point in what's called the Cloud Adoption Framework. So in short, CAF is a framework put together. It's put together using the same pillars for well architected as well as the security baseline requirements or disciplines, governance disciplines. It provides documentation for how to build an environment, and even better, it provides blueprints and bicep. There's also Terraform examples for how to build your environment. This is taking it to operationalizing. This is deploying environment. So using the CAF framework as a starting point for a infrastructure journey in Azure is an excellent choice. It takes you several levels up the ladder, if you wish, to improve your security posture, your compliance posture, not geared towards any specific standards, but it's looking at CIS standards, for example, to make decisions for how to build things in Azure.
So yeah, really a set of best practices that we see most of our customers really start to adopt there.
Yes.
Well,
I want to just close the loop on the comment I made earlier. Whether or not you are in a need of, or that you find yourself having requirements around policy frameworks. We've often helped customers build environments, and we're putting a virtual requirement in place. So we'll pick one of the NIST requirements and build an environment towards a NIST, let's say NIST 853. Leaving the customer with a very strong security and compliance posture, even when it's not required. Very much in line with what we like to call best practices here at Planet. Thank you, Ken.
Thanks, Carsten. Well, it's very odd. And we knew today's topic was kind of a dry topic, so we didn't want to kill you with PowerPoints and too much detail, but we hope that you got something out of this today. It's very odd that we run short on time, so that's really good. We're usually right up to the last minute, so we have plenty of time for questions. If you have some questions, please let us know. Start putting them in the window. But we would love to know, after this session, do you feel like you have a better understanding about security baseline governance? If you could just answer that question, that'd be awesome. Let's go to the questions or open comments. Karsten or Dr. Mike or Scott, we'd love to hear any other final comments from you all. Well, you can turn off the recording, Casey, at this point. We don't need to record all if people want to talk about some personal or some specific to their environments. We'd love to hear what you